It's the real news. I'm Aaron Mate. The U.S. and Israel are pulling out from the UN body UNESCO. UNESCO is responsible for international cooperation in education, science, culture, and communication. But the U.S. government and Israel say it has an anti-Israel bias. But is UNESCO really being punished because, in fact, Israel and the U.S. have an anti-Palestinian bias? Over U.S. and Israeli objections, UNESCO has admitted Palestine as a member and has declared the Palestinian city of Hebron a World Heritage Site in danger. Ali Abunimah is co-founder of the website Electronic Intifada, and his latest book is The Battle for Justice in Palestine. Ali, welcome. You have an article up at the Electronic Intifada saying that in doing this and pulling out of UNESCO, the U.S. is putting Israel first.
Yes, it's extraordinary because Trump came in shouting America first, and the U.S. statement announcing the withdrawal from UNESCO specifically cites an alleged anti-Israel bias at UNESCO, which I found extraordinary because it's impossible to imagine the U.S. citing an anti-British or anti-Canadian or anti-French bias for any action it might take. That would subject the president to all kinds of accusations of, putting another country first. But that seems to be quite normal in this country, especially odd, I think, when we have all of this hysteria about supposed Russian interference.
Right. Yes. One of the main topics of focus right now. Let's talk more about UNESCO. And, Israel's been leading a campaign against it for a long time. And UNESCO's crime appears to be that it's voiced concern for the very precarious state of Palestinian areas like Hebron and also the old city of Jerusalem.
Yeah, it's important to understand, sort of to step back and look at the context of military occupation and colonization by Israel. As everyone knows, Israel has been aggressively colonizing the West Bank for decades, and particularly in and around Jerusalem. And one of the key elements of this colonization project is staking pseudo-historical claims based on, archaeology. And so Israel has always used heritage and culture and archaeology as a weapon to try to legitimize its illegal colonization. What UNESCO has done has to, raise the red flag on this and to point out that Israel has systematically undermined some major sites, including the sites in the Old City of Jerusalem, and it has declared the Old City of Jerusalem a World Heritage Site in danger for a number of years because of Israeli excavations and colonization and other actions. And it made that declaration in Hebron as well over the summer. And Israel's objection has also been based on a lie that the various UN resolutions, the various UNESCO resolutions on these matters have denied Jewish connections either to the Al-Aqsa compound, Temple Mount in Jerusalem, or to the Ibrahimi Mosque in Hebron. And you hear this claim repeated all the time, and it's an absolute lie. Those resolutions, in fact, recognize explicitly that these places are venerated by Muslims, Christians, and Jews. There's no denial of any connection. But what the resolutions state explicitly is that these sites are in occupied Palestinian territory. And Israel's objection to that is that Israel objects to international law. Israel doesn't want international law enforced. So simply put, stating international law as it is, that no one disputes, that these are occupied territories, is what Israel and the United States call anti-Israel bias.
Right, Ali. What you're talking about there, I'm just thinking it's a wonderful metaphor for how defenders of Israeli government policies have long the terms in which they framed this conflict. If you recognize basic Palestinian existence, humanity, like, for example, recognizing their connection to the sites where they've lived forever, then all of a sudden you're denying you're denying Jewish rights and you're denying Jewish identity. It really is quite striking. Let me ask you, whenever I interview you about the Israel-Palestine conflict, it's like every single time we have to point out that these policies predate Trump. And this story with UNESCO is no exception, because after UNESCO voted to admit Palestine as a member back in 2011, I think, it was the administration of Barack Obama that cut funding to UNESCO in response. Now, that's put the U.S. in arrears for hundreds of millions of dollars. And what this decision by Trump now means is that the U.S. is not going to have to pay, it's not going to pay its bill. So it owes UNESCO something like $500 million in dues. But now, because Trump is pulling out, the U.S. is not going to cover the dues that it owes because Obama cut its payments back 5 years ago.
Well, that's right. And all of these policies are a continuation. Of course, Trump is only the latest president to provide political and diplomatic cover to Israel's crimes, its colonization, its occupation, and so on. Of course, Obama was doing that. While he was cutting funding to UNESCO, let's remember that Obama is the one who, a year ago, signed a memorandum with Israel to give it the biggest military aid package in the history of the United States, starting from the coming year, the coming fiscal year. So Obama was also a continuation of that policy. And it's important not to reduce this to big bad old Trump. These are U.S. policies that have been fundamentally, structurally anti-Palestinian for decades. But, as regards UNESCO and the presence of Israel in the United States, I would say good riddance to them, because what they have done is turn UNESCO and other UN agencies into tools for their own attempts to legitimize Israel's violations of international law and Palestinian rights. And now, perhaps without the distraction of Israel's bullying and smear campaigns, remember when the votes went against it last year, Israeli diplomats started comparing UNESCO to ISIS. That's the level of defamation and smearing that Israel gets into. I think without those distractions, without the sabotage by the United States and Israel, perhaps UNESCO can go on to do some good in the world. So I welcome Israel's announcement that it plans to withdraw from UNESCO, and encourage Israel to go much further and to withdraw from other UN agencies, and indeed from the United Nations altogether. I think that would be fitting, since Israel has, since its establishment, shown nothing but utter contempt for the United Nations, utter disregard for international law, and is in violation of more UN resolutions by far than any other state. So I would say good riddance to Israel, and encourage it to follow the logic of its departure from UNESCO and to leave altogether.
Ali, let me switch gears a little bit to this news coming out of the occupied territories. Just on Thursday, the two main Palestinian factions, Hamas and Fatah, signed a reconciliation agreement in Cairo. It seems like a pretty big concession for Hamas, because they're effectively giving up day-to-day control of Gaza, which they've been in control of for a decade now, and also Gaza's borders. Your thoughts on what's just happened here?
Well, it's deja vu. They've signed, I don't know how many reconciliation agreements over the past few years. Right now, there is tremendous optimism or hope, let's say, among Palestinians, particularly in Gaza, that this will yield something, because the situation in Gaza is so desperate. And Hamas is really in a bind. It has really besieged and cornered in Gaza, so needed to do something to break out and change the situation. But I'm honestly very skeptical that it's going to lead to any dramatic change, because really the fundamental disagreement between Hamas and Fatah, or Hamas and the Palestinian Authority run by Mahmoud Abbas and his Fatah faction, has not been addressed by this deal, which is that Hamas is an armed resistance movement that has fought 3 wars against Israel in the last decade, while Abbas and his authority work closely with the Israeli occupation army in the West Bank. So it seems impossible, it is impossible to reconcile, on the one hand, a group that is collaborating with the occupation, on the other hand, with a group that is resisting to it. And so the only way to resolve this is if Abbas gives up his collaborative relationship with the Israeli occupation, or Hamas surrenders its weapons and renounces resistance. And neither of those outcomes are going to are likely. And so there's going to be an attempt at some kind of fudge and to kick it down the road. For all the fanfare of this agreement, and they had celebrations in Gaza and so on, the issue of Hamas's weapons has been kicked down the road. It has not been addressed. And you have Israel saying that we will not accept any agreement in which Hamas does not surrender its weapons. So really, I don't see anything fundamental going to change. I think it's important to understand the split among the Palestinian factions, not really as an internal issue, but as a product of the relationship with Israel, is that Israel will only deal with and accept Palestinian leaders who collaborate with the occupation. It will not accept a resistance movement as part of a Palestinian political establishment. And so I think that really raises fundamental questions about what the Palestinian strategy is. Is it to continue to go along with this dead peace process of collaborating and cooperating with Israel? Or does there have to be some kind of broader strategy that mobilizes Palestinians to resist?
Right. I mean, Israel is so opposed to Hamas and its insistence on its right to resist that even when Hamas respects these multiple ceasefires that we've seen, it's Israel that we constantly see violating it in an attempt to provoke a violent response.
That's correct. And it's not just Israel, because the so-called international community is very complicit in this destructive dynamic. Let me give you an example. Last May, Hamas put forward a new charter which made some really significant concessions. I mean, these were positions that it had taken before, but it sort of formalized them in May, particularly accepting the 1967 borders as the outline of a settlement, offering Israel a long-term, indefinite truce and ceasefire, and separating itself from the Muslim Brotherhood, saying that it's an independent Palestinian nationalist movement and so on. And as I've pointed out in some of my articles, these are the kinds of shifts in position that were fundamental to making breakthroughs in Ireland, with Sinn Féin and the IRA on the one hand and the British and the loyalists on the others. And that, what had to happen was there had to be reciprocal steps. So what you would expect to see now, for example, is the European Union, as one example, acknowledging those changes in Hamas's position and opening up some kind of dialogue and encouraging Israel to offer something reciprocal. But instead what we've seen is the European Union taking the same hardline rejectionist approach as Israel and is saying we will have no change in policy, we will not talk to them. Effectively, the Palestinian resistance has to surrender. And what that guarantees is that there is going to be no political breakthrough, and I think it increases the likelihood of another war against Gaza with potentially even more catastrophic consequences. But we have to be very clear that if and when that happens, it will not be because of Hamas, it will be because of the rejectionism of Israel and its international supporters.
We have to leave it there. Ali Abunimah, co-founder of the Electronic Intifada. His latest book is The Battle for Justice in Palestine. Thanks, Ali.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us on The Real News.